It was a wild week one in the NFL. We'll tell you who the biggest winners and losers are coming out of the week on this episode of the Loton Dynasty Football Podcast.
You are Locked On Dynasty Football, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day. Here are your hosts, Marcus Mosher and Kate Madjuk.
Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. This episode is brought to you by PrizePicks. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use promo code LockedOnNFL, all lowercase, to win $50 instantly when you play $5. Welcome back. I am your host, Marcus Mosher. You can follow me on Twitter at Marcus_Mosher. Joining me today, as always, is Kate Madjuk. You can follow her on Twitter at Kate Madjuk. You can also read her over at Yahoo. On today's show, we are breaking down all of the action from week one, discussing the biggest winners, losers, and then the tight end position, which everybody was a loser, but we'll get to that later. Kate, I want to start with the quarterbacks across the NFL because wow, what a rough week for quarterbacks if you had Patrick Mahomes, Dak Prescott, Deshaun Watson, Caleb Williams, Will Levis. I mean, Kirk Cousins. The list goes on and on and on.
But man, if you were a Derek Carr manager, you were home free.
You were loving his performance on his bench.
He's a quarterback 6, Marcus. Elite Derek Carr, who my biggest concern drafting Chris Olave was that the man never throws touchdowns. Boom, comes out, throws 3 to open up week one. But I want to highlight some of the interesting notes that you came up with coming out of week one, because there's a lot of data to indicate that we should not be panicking just yet about some of the hogwash quarterback play we saw coming out of the gate.
Yeah, it was rough around the league. So one of the things I was looking at is just the Sunday afternoon games, the 1 o'clock and 4 p.m. Eastern time games. The net passing yards, the average net passing yards across the NFL during that stretch was 168, Kate. There was only one team that had over 300 yards passing. That was the Miami Dolphins. And there was, I'm looking at it now, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 teams that didn't even get to 150 net passing yards on Sunday. This should be expected a little bit, right? We've never seen so many quarterbacks not play in the preseason. Training camp has been shortened where these quarterbacks just don't have as many practice opportunities as they used to have. And the defenses are just way ahead of the offenses at this stage of the season. So across the league, scoring was down. The quarterback performances were down. It was rough.
Definitely rough. Now, are there any, particular performances that stand out to you as the quote unquote real deal? Like I'm talking the Bo Nixes, Bo Nix, 42 total pass attempts in week one. 42. That was tied for the third most in the league. And guess what? He completed 26 of them for 138 yards, 0 touchdowns, 2 interceptions. Daniel Jones had a similarly awful day, also attempted 42 passes, completed just 22 of those for 186 yards, 2 picks. Just like, I think we can safely say those 2 are the real deal. Anybody else stick out to you?
In general, I just don't want to overreact to week one, right? I mean, for the most part, what we see in week one is like the glorified preseason. I think Bill Belichick even calls like the first month of the season like the real NFL preseason, right? So I don't want to overreact one way or the other. However, there are some quarterbacks out there that if they didn't look good last year and they struggled in week one, it kind of confirms your priors a little bit. You mentioned Daniel Jones. I think Bryce Young was another one. I've been somebody who's been a Bryce Young believer. It's getting really hard to believe that a breakout will happen. The very first play that he had was an interception. He really, really struggled. Bo Nix, I just want to get back to that one really quickly. It was just a lot of the same stuff that we saw from Bo Nix when he was in college, right? A lot of short underneath passes, not attacking down the field very much. I do think that'll come as he progresses as a passer, but I think it's going to be rough and ugly early on.
Yeah, not great. Now, the one player I want to mention in particular before we move on to some of the running backs who we did have some standouts at the running back position. Let's talk about Deshaun Watson because he is one of the most fascinating players in the National Football League right now. I mean, the Browns are handcuffed to this man for the foreseeable future. They've even pushed some money further down the line. So like 2024, his current contract carries $200 million in dead cap. 2025, that number only drops to $172 million in dead cap. 2026, just under $100 million in dead cap. So like, I know it's so hard to be in on Deshaun Watson, but is there any circumstance where you're kind of still curious just because of A, the contract, B, I mean, they were going up against a pretty tough Dallas Cowboys defense. Like,
yeah. It's one of these things, are these reasons that he struggled or are they excuses? Because I look at the Deshaun Watson situation, right? He got hurt, I think it was week 5 last year against the Ravens. Actually played really well in that game before he got hurt. Missed the entire season, missed most of the offseason. He was limited in training camp, didn't do anything in preseason. And then in week 1, goes up against Mike Zimmer's defense. And you and I were talking pre-show, like some of the stuff that Mike Zimmer put out there was diabolical. Like some of the coverages and pressure packages that he was throwing at Deshaun Watson, I don't know if even the best quarterbacks in the league could handle. We should also mention no Nick Chubb. Both of their starting offensive tackles were out in this game, and they were planning on Jack Conklin starting at left tackle in this game. He got scratched early on Sunday afternoon, so that made things a little tougher. He also didn't get a lot of help from his receivers. Amari Cooper dropped a easy touchdown, which would have been a 40-yard touchdown. David Njoku got banged up in this game. Obviously, no Nick Chubb. It wasn't great, but I do want to see what Deshaun Watson looks like against some easier defenses. Unfortunately, Kate, he plays in the AFC North with the Ravens and the Steelers in that division. So, like, it's not necessarily going to get a lot easier for Deshaun Watson and the Cleveland Browns anytime soon.
Yeah, I mean, the upcoming schedule maybe a little bit more favorable. Gets the Jaguars here in week 2. Then you've got the New York Giants, the Commanders in week 6. Week 5. There's like some interesting matchups. I don't think all the tougher AFC North matchups, they don't come until a little bit later in the year. So like, but that's kind of the point, right? So we have the kind of fluff matchups here in the coming weeks. I do think these might be more indicative of like what to expect from Deshaun Watson at baseline. Give us an idea, like if he struggles against some of these more vanilla defenses.
It's the Commanders. That's the one for me. Like if he can't put up points against the Commanders, who, I mean, just got shredded by Baker Mayfield, right? Like if that's the one for me, if he struggles in that game,
then you're out.
Then I think the Browns have to think about making a switch at quarterback. But I also wonder, Kate, like, are we just to the point now where Deshaun Watson has zero confidence? Because I think we saw that at times in the Dallas game where he wasn't trusting what he was seeing. I also want to mention one other thing. Cleveland had 10 offensive penalties in this game between holdings, illegal formations. They were just a disaster on that entire side of the ball. So I know it's really easy to put all the blame on Deshaun Watson, and you can do that. I think that's fair because of how poorly he played. But I think he's a little bit of a scapegoat here because everybody else on that side of the ball was horrendous.
I think that's fair. And, you know, again, to the point of like the injuries for Nick Chubb, we're not going to have him at least for the first 4 games of the season. I don't necessarily know that it's a given that he'll be fully healthy once that 4-week mark clears, right? Like we don't know when he's going to be back in the offense. We don't know when he is back. Is he at 100%? The offensive tackle situation, like when does the offensive line get healthy? We don't know. We can't take any of those things for granted. But you're right. I think I'm going to take a big red marker and draw it around the Commanders on the schedule for pretty much any quarterback that I have questions about. Any quarterback that goes up against the Washington Commanders secondary this year, I'm going to say, if you can't get it done that week, you probably can't get it done. So that is going to be a very telling game for the value of Deshaun Watson. Because if not,
If not then, when? Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Rough outing for not only Deshaun Watson, but several quarterbacks around the NFL. There were a couple of running backs that stood out, including my guy, Tony Pollard. Let's discuss him next. This episode is brought to you by PrizePicks. PrizePicks is America's #1 daily fantasy sports app with over 5 million active members. PrizePicks is the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Unlike other apps on PrizePicks, it's just you against the numbers. All you have to do is pick more or less on 2 to 6 player stat projections and watch the winnings roll in. You can now win up to 100 times your money on PrizePicks with as little as 4 correct picks. PrizePicks is the best way to get action on states, including California, Texas, and Georgia. I absolutely love PrizePicks. It's so much fun. You can download the PrizePicks app today, and if you use promo code Loton NFL, you get $50 instantly when you play $5. That's promo code Loton NFL, all uppercase, on PrizePicks to get $50 instantly when you play $5. You don't even need to win to receive the $50 bonus. It's guaranteed. PrizePicks, run your game. This episode is brought to you by BetterHelp. What's something that you would love to learn? As an adult, do you make time to learn new things as often as you'd like, or was that lost in your childhood? Kids are always learning and growing, but as adults, sometimes we lose that curiosity. What's something that you would love to learn? Maybe it's a new language, maybe it's golf, or maybe it's how to garden, or maybe something like as simple as beating your best friend in bowling. I know my wife has been getting into bowling, so that's why I mentioned that one. Therapy can help you reconnect with your sense of wonder because your back-to-school era can come at any age. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's done entirely online. It's designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. Just fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist, and you can switch therapists at any time for any reason at no additional charge. Rediscover your curiosity with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/lockedon today to get 10% off your first month. That is BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon. Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast. We would like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. For your second listen, check out the Locked On NFL Show. It's a brand new show, 2 shows every single day. First, the madman Tyler Rowland kicks off your morning with a double shot of NFL espresso, and then stop by the barbershop with Tony Wiggins for some real NFL talk. Add in the Locked On local experts, and you get unprecedented NFL insight, hot opinions, detailed breakdowns, all in 30 minutes. It's the new Locked On NFL, and it's twice a day. Make the madman Tyler Rowland and the barber Tony Wiggins your second listen at the new Locked On NFL on YouTube or wherever you get your podcast. All right, we are back here discussing the biggest winners and losers from week 1 of the 2024 season. Okay, let's start at the running back position. Let's be positive because we were kind of negative in the first segment. Who was the running back that stood out to you in week 1?
I got to shout out a few guys, actually. So I want to get into Tony Pollard, who's been your favorite, running back dynasty buy all off season long. I want to talk about Kyren Williams because there are a lot of question marks there. But in general, I want to say like the running back position, some of the biggest winners in general this past weekend. You have players like Ramondre Stevenson, who I thought absolutely crushed on the ground. J.K. Dobbins, big shout out to J.K. Dobbins, who just absolutely had a monster performance here. And let's remember, he had, a pretty devastating injury history coming into this game. And I was one of the biggest skeptics. He averaged 13.5 yards per rush attempt, 135 yards on the ground, and a score.
He had multiple 40-yard runs in this game.
It was insane. And like the juice coming off of such a complicated injury history like J.K. Dobbins had, I want to shout that out big time. Aaron Jones came out, looked like an absolute rock star, looked like the guy who closed out the year with 5 straight 100+ yard rushing games last year. Like I think the running backs were kind of the only offensive players to really keep it together this week.
Yeah, I agree. The running backs across the NFL look pretty good. I do want to go back to my guy, Tony Pollard. We were worried about this split between Tajay Spears and Tony Pollard.
What
Tony
split?
Pollard, what split? 16 carries for Tony Pollard, 82 yards and a touchdown. Tajay Spears, 4 for 21. Now, Tajay Spears did get some more work in the passing game. He got 4 targets, 4 catches for 11 yards. But Tony Pollard also had 4 targets in this one. He's the clear-cut RB1 in this backfield, right? And I think Tajay is somebody that's going to rotate in. I think Tony Pollard, this season at least, is going to give you pretty solid RB2 production, and I think you can bank on it every single week.
Yeah, 4.2 yards after contact per attempt. You love to see that. 4.9 yards per carry, almost a 30% missed forced tackle rate. Like the advanced metrics looked just as good as the eye test, which I think is super encouraging for a guy like Tony Pollard. Kyren Williams, we have to mention, just dominated the touches. There was a lot of concern, just in general. I had concerns about the matchup. So he was actually one of my fades of the week on Yahoo. And that was just for the fact that I wasn't sure how he was going to put up against this Lions defensive line. And he looked absolutely incredible. But what I think fantasy managers are really, really happy about is the fact that, there was virtually no competition for touches. When it came to the running back touches, it was it, and that was it. Like Kyren Williams.
Who cares about him being listed as a punt returner, right? Like it's going to be the Kyren Williams show all year long.
Catches,
I do think Blake Corum is eventually going to have a role in this backfield, and I think Sean McVay is going to probably ease him in. But as of right now, Kyren Williams to the moon. Kate, I did want to mention one other running back. Do you know which running back led the league in touches this week? I'll tell you the number of touches. It was 33 touches.
Joe Mixon.
Joe Mixon led the NFL in touches this week. 30 carries for 159 yards and a touchdown. Do you know what's crazy about that 159 yards, though, Kate? It wasn't like there was a big run in there that's kind of artificially inflating that. His longest run of the day was 13 yards, which tells you like he was pretty effective all game long. Also added in 19 yards in the receiving game. Joe Mixon, I was kind of down on Joe Mixon. I didn't like what we saw last year from Cincinnati. He kind of looks like a perfect fit in this Houston offense.
It really does. And just from a workhorse perspective, you cannot understate the fact that, like, yes, he is on the final year of his deal. I'm sure the Houston Texans are going to squeeze every ounce of work that they can possibly get out of him. If you have, a league where you are a contender and you need some running back depth, like he's probably one of the best discounts you can get because the long-term value is questionable. But like from a 2024 perspective, probably going to win you your league. Another guy I want to talk about before we close out and talk about the tight end position, which none of us are winners there. Let's talk about Zamir White, who was one of our kind of questionable, like, is he going to be the guy? Is he not going to be the guy? Because it was Alexander Madison behind him. But in the preseason, there were some causes for concern. We saw the split, I think, was much heavier, leaning in the favor of Alexander Madison than we thought it would. And then it kind of played out that way in week 1 as well.
Yeah, the good news is that he still dominated the touches, the rushing attempts, right? 13 carries. The next one was Alexander Madison with 5. Dylan Lobby, who we kind of mentioned as a dynasty sleeper, healthy scratch this game, right? So it wasn't a productive game for Zamir White, but at least he was getting some work. Now, the problem was 13 carries for 44 yards, and that included a 12-yard run, had a fumble, didn't give you really anything in the passing game. And that's where Alexander Madison, surprisingly, was effective. 4 for 43 and a touchdown, had a 31-yard touchdown in this game. I'm a little nervous about Zamir White just because if he's not getting the receiving work and he's not scoring touchdowns, then what do we have in Zamir White?
Not much.
Not much.
I think those are all very fair concerns. Real quick on the wide receivers, any player that you want to shout out in particular as a big concern. We didn't really touch on wide receivers here because I do think it's just such an extension of the quarterback position in general, and we saw pretty bad quarterback play across the board yesterday.
I have one name. I don't know why Gino hates Jackson Smith and Jigba. Like JSN was one of my biggest buys this offseason. And again, it could still turn around. It's week 1. 2 targets against the Broncos on Sunday. Like that's just not going to get it done.
It really will not. But again, I'm such a firm believer in the talent. And my hope is that Ryan Grubb is going to come out of this week and say, okay, what did we miss? What did we miss in this one? Okay, if Gino's not going to make it a point to target Jackson Smith and Jigba in his reads, then we're going to need to generate some offensive touches. We're going to have to make sure we get the ball in his hands. And that's all I'm hoping for heading into week 2.
Kate, Tyler Lockett was very, very questionable to play on Sunday. He had 7 targets. DK Metcalf and JSN had 6 targets combined in this game. It's pretty wild.
It feels like malpractice.
Yeah. All right, let's discuss the tight end position because that was pretty rough on Sunday. We'll talk about that entire positional group next. This episode is brought to you by Gametime. I love Gametime. It's what I use whenever I buy tickets to my favorite sporting events, concerts, comedy events. Gametime has a new feature called Gametime Picks that makes getting tickets for your favorite live events even easier than ever before. Gametime Picks filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats so you don't have to waste your time searching through thousands of tickets. There's so many things that I love about Gametime, but one of my favorite things is the panoramic view. You get to look exactly what your seat's going to look like, what the angle is going to look like on the field before you buy. It's absolutely fantastic. Plus, they have the lowest price guarantee, or Gametime will credit you 110% of the difference. Plus, your purchase is covered with the most flexible customer service policy in the ticketing industry. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use promo code Loton NFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem promo code Loton NFL for $20 off. Download Gametime today. What time is it? Gametime. All right, Kay, let's talk about the tight end position because if you had the names Jake Ferguson, David Njoku, Dallas Goedert, I mean, the list goes on and on. Travis Kelce, you were disappointed this week. Should we be concerned about the tight end position as a whole, or can we just chalk it up to a fluky week 1?
I do think there's, in part, a real reason to chalk it up to a fluky week 1. We spent an entire 10-minute segment here talking about how the quarterback play was poor, how these teams are still knocking off some of the rust, how, the game plans are still coming together for these offenses. They're seeing what is working, seeing what isn't working. What I do want to shout out is like the guys who are running the routes, right? So Colby Parkinson, tight end for the Los Angeles Rams, led all tight ends heading into Monday Night Football with 42 routes run, absent T. Higgins, with a now injured Puka Nacua. Like, if you are in a single tight end league, not even a tight end premium league, I think you need to be double checking your waiver wire for Colby Parkinson here. Yep. Theo Johnson, rookie for the New York Giants, tied for the second most routes run with Mark Andrews on the week. Mark Andrews, we already kind of touched on Friday, like coming back from this car accident, there's a lot of just general things we can take into the context there. But all in all, I think the tight ends that we hoped to see out there running routes were running routes. Not all of them got the target share, but I'm willing to be patient.
Hey, Kyle Pitts scored a touchdown, though.
He did. Kyle Pitts right now heading into Monday Night Football, your tight end 3 on the week. Isaiah Likely, the only tight end to score more than 12.5 fantasy points this week with that 9-catch, 111-yard, 1 touchdown performance. But I mean, in general, it was a down week. There were just 5 total tight ends to score a touchdown on the week, and 3 of those 5 had 26 or fewer receiving yards. So yeah,
Yeah, it's.
bad
I
week.
mean, you even look at somebody like Evan Ingram had like 16 receiving yards. Dalton Schultz 16 receiving yards. So it was just a rough week across the board. It's because the scoring was just so down compared to what we're used to seeing in week one. Just not a lot of points being scored in general. We had a lot of defensive touchdowns. We had a couple kick return touchdowns, a punt return touchdown. Just chalk it up to a fluky week one. I'm not panicking at all. I will say there was one tight end that I thought looked pretty good. Brock Bowers had a very nice first game with the Raiders, 6 catches for 59 yards. Obviously, that's not a league winning performance, but for a rookie tight end, I thought that was a pretty solid day. So he might be one of the guys moving forward where it's just pretty consistent because he's going to get the routes and he's going to get the targets. But again, don't panic here at the tight end position yet, unless you had an injury to like David Njoku, who has a high ankle sprain. Those are usually 4 to 6 week injuries at least. Jake Ferguson, who left the game with a knee injury, we don't know the severity yet. But if you have a Dalton Kincaid or Sam Laporta or any of these other tight ends, I'm just not concerned yet.
For sure. Yeah, there's going to be plenty of opportunities down the line. And again, just with kind of those week one oddities, I think you have to take everything with a grain of salt, similar to the way that we kind of told you, digest the preseason with just at a little bit of a level of skepticism. Look at the trends, look at who's playing snaps and, you know, who's on the field in what situations. Pay attention to that information. Even defenses are still kind of, you know, getting a feel for their opponents and how they're going to run their schemes. Like the first month of the NFL season can be a weird one. So just be patient and try to pay attention to that usage primarily before we really like throw ourselves off a cliff here.
Yeah, I use the first month of the season, as you mentioned. Like, I'm not going to overreact or really make any drastic roster moves in the first month of the season, just because you want to see how things are playing out. You want to see the role, but I get concerned if like a player's just not playing a majority of the snaps, right? Like that's when it's time to be concerned. But if it's somebody like use Dalton Schultz, who's basically out there running every single route, playing every snap, the production is going to come. You just have to be a little patient.
And patient we shall be. Good thing we'll be here for you all season long.
Yes.
So.
All right, that is it for today's show. We want to thank you for making Locked On Dynasty Football your first listen of the day. For your second listen, go check out the new Locked On NFL Show. 2 shows every single day, 1 in the morning with Tyler Rowland, 1 in the afternoon with Tony Wiggins. They do absolutely fantastic work. Go check out our podcast wherever you get your podcasts. We are free and available on all platforms. We have shows up on YouTube every single day. You can follow Kate on Twitter at Kate Monjuk. I'm at Marcus_Mosier. Enjoy your Monday, and we will see you right back here tomorrow.